Hello, and welcome to Everything Fear, your one-stop shop for all things horror. Coming up today, we have my personal top 10 werewolf movies of all time. Stick around. So welcome to Everything Fear, your one-stop shop for all things horror. I'm Kit Tinsley, I'm a horror author, film academic, and general horror geek. And this week we're going to be looking at my top 10 personal favourite werewolf movies of all time. Now this is obviously a completely personal list, so if you agree or disagree, please feel free to let us know in the comments. And if you can, please give this video a like and subscribe. At number 10, we have An American Werewolf in Paris. This film was made in 1997 and directed by Anthony Waller. The film starred Tom Everett Scott and Julie Depley. This film is a sequel that nobody wanted, with a cast and a script that was far better than most people expected. This film successfully blends horror and comedy in a way that is reminiscent of the original film, but also adds a adventure film feel. The chemistry between the two leads is also really quite good. What really lets this film down, though, is the 90s CGI. Gone are the wonderful Rick Baker special effects that made the original such a standout. Instead, we have these morphing transitions into CGI werewolves, which really lets the film down. I think if it hadn't have been for the poor special effects, this film probably would have been a much bigger hit than it was, and would be much better remembered. The CGI basically turns the sequel into an entertaining footnote rather than a good film in its own right. Number 9, The Curse of the Werewolf, released in 1961 and directed by Terence Fisher. This is Hammer's foray into werewolf movies. Hammer was well into the swing of remaking the classic monsters at this point, having already successfully done Dracula, Frankenstein and The Mummy. But by 1961, it was the turn of the Wolfman to grace the screen once more. This film is beautifully shot. Fisher had already proved himself on The Curse of Frankenstein and the Dracula film. Curse of the Werewolf stars Oliver Reed as Leon, a young man with a tragic past and a dark secret. He's cursed by the light of the full moon to turn into a werewolf. Can the love of his adoptive family save him from his terrible fate? Reed is fantastic in this film, and given what we know about his hell-raising lifestyle in real life, the idea of him containing a beast within isn't that much of a stretch. The film's set in 18th century Spain, and as always with Hammer, the costumes and the sets are phenomenal. Number 8, A Company of Wolves. This film came out in 1984 and was directed by Neil Jordan. Company of Wolves is based on the writings of Angela Carter and her magic realism way of retelling fairy tales. Jordan gives us a lavish, dark, adult fairy tale with A Company of Wolves. A series of interlinked cautionary tales wrapped up in a sexually charged version of the Red Riding Hood story. The film is full of wonderful imagery and dreamlike / nightmarish imagery. The transformation sequences here are really interesting as the wolves come out of the mouths of the humans, ripping their way out, which is quite a novel idea for the time and I don't think had been done before. The film was moderately successful, but was perhaps a little too arty for a mainstream audience. Number 7, The Wolfman, 1941. Directed by George Wagner and starring Lon Chaney Jr. and Claude Rains, this is the original Universal Wolfman film. This classic movie invented so much of the lore we now associate with werewolves. It's unreal. It's a masterpiece, this film. From the makeup effects to the fog-laden sets, the visuals of this film are absolutely stunning, and the archetype of Gothic cinema. Add to that the outstanding performances of Lon Chaney Jr. and Claude Rains as an estranged father and son, and it really elevates this film above being pure schlock into much more compelling family drama. Number 6, Silver Bullet. Released in 1985 and directed by Daniel Attias, this is one of the lesser known werewolf movies of the 80s, but in many ways still a great film to watch. The film was based on the Stephen King graphic novella The Cycle of the Werewolf. It is, as you would expect from King, a wonderful examination of supernatural evil in small town America. Corey Haim is great here as the young boy who knows that something is going on and that there is a monster in their midst, but that no one believes. Everett McGill is at his sinister best in this film as the local reverend hiding a dark secret. His performance in this film is really menacing and on par with his performances in Twin Peaks and People Under the Stairs. Also, this is a rare example of a film where the actor playing the werewolf as a human is also the man inside the suit, so that was some commitment by the actor there. Number 5, Dog Soldiers, released in 2002. The directorial debut of Neil Marshall is a film that feels like it has a much bigger budget than it actually had. Now, this is partly down to Marshall's undeniable talent behind the camera, but also to the pedigree of talent in front of the camera as well. Perhaps the best thing about this film is the way that it does away with the usual tropes of the werewolf movie of following an individual who is becoming a werewolf, and instead uses werewolves as the primary antagonist in what is essentially a siege movie. The film is cleverly written and full of humour, but humour that actually comes from the characters' personalities rather than being an out-and-out comedy that would distract from the tone of the horror element of the film. The whole cast is fantastic, but all credit must go to Sean Pertwee, whose portrayal of Sergeant Wells is fantastic. The werewolves themselves are incredibly well designed for the budget and shot wonderfully to hide their flaws. Number 4, The Howling. 1981, directed by Joe Dante. Joe Dante's classic werewolf movie is always going to be faced with a problem. In most people's minds, it is always going to be remembered as the second best werewolf movie of 1981, with the second best werewolf transformation of that year. The film cleverly shuns any werewolf-related material until about a third of the way into the film. Up until then, it feels like you're watching either a slasher movie or a serial killer movie, both of which were more popular at the time. Classic horror monsters had gone out of favour. The problem is, though, that the title, The Howling, to me does suggest werewolves. The transformation of Robert Picardo's character in the film is sensational. The way his face elongates and pulses is truly terrifying. If it had been released any other year, it would have hands down been the best werewolf transformation that anyone had seen that year. And it still remains probably the second best transformation of all time. The plot here surrounds a colony of werewolves who are isolating themselves from humanity. This is a fascinating idea, which of course all goes hideously wrong. Number 3, Gingersnaps, released in 2003 and directed by John Fawcett. Throughout the history of cinema, the werewolf has been used as a metaphor for either the duality of man or the animalistic, predatory nature of male sexuality. Gingersnaps makes the genius decision to use the werewolf as a metaphor for the female reproductive cycle and female sexuality. The fact that it took until the year 2000 for someone to make this connection just seems incredible to me. Add to that the writing of the film and the wonderful outsider humour of our central sisters, as well as the performances of Emily Perkins as the worried sister and Catherine Isabel as the young woman transforming into a werewolf, and Mimi Rogers as their mother, who just acts like everything that's happening is fine and natural, as well as some pretty good creature design and werewolf effects and makeup, make this a modern classic for me. Number 2, Wolf, 1994. Wolf is probably the movie on this list with the highest pedigree. Directed by Mike Nichols, the man responsible for The Graduate, Catch-22, Working Girl, and so many more. Starring the Hollywood royalty of Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer, with support from Christopher Plummer and James Spader. This was Mike Nichols' only journey into horror cinema, and what it gives us is this thrilling, humorous, exciting, dark fairy tale. The rules here are that Jack Nicholson is becoming a werewolf, and every day until the full moon, he is becoming more and more wolf-like. And if he doesn't break the curse by the full moon, he will spend forever in the form of the wolf. This is an interesting take on the usual mythology, where the person is human most of the time and then transforms by the light of the full moon. And this gives the film a ticking clock element to the story, which really makes it more thrilling. Nicholson is, of course, outstanding in this role. His transformation from mild-mannered publisher into leaping Wolfman is completely believable. Wolf stands in a league and genre, really, all of its own. So we get to the top spot, and my personal favourite werewolf movie of all time, which is, of course, 1981's John Landis directed An American Werewolf in London. Since its release, no other film has bettered this film in terms of being a werewolf movie and its transformation sequence. The way that this film blends horror and comedy is absolutely brilliant. The laughs are genuine out loud laughs, and the scares are terrifying and brutal scares. American tourist David Kessler is attacked by a werewolf on the Yorkshire moors and transferred to London for medical treatment. From this moment on, David is cursed to become a werewolf. David is a wonderfully sympathetic character, and you genuinely care about him, which makes his transformation and the film's eventual conclusion all the more tragic. You spend the whole film hoping there is some way out of this for him, so it does make the ending completely heartbreaking. In nearly 40 years, no film about werewolves has even come close to knocking this off the top spot for me. So, that was my list of werewolf movies. If you agree, please let me know in the comments. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. If there's some werewolf movies you'd like to mention, let me know.